Hello, Tyler Bryden here. Hope everything is going well. I made a change. Two changes, first of all. Hair, and I got this ridiculous mustache. I'm standing today. I had a call with an old friend this week, and he was standing there, and he was moving around, and I don't know if it got competitive or exactly what happened, but it just triggered me. I've had this standing desk. The intent when I got it was to stand. I was doing it for a bit. It fell off, and so I'm here, and I'm back. It gives me a little bit more energy, a little more jump, and maybe a little bit more perseverance when I'm talking, which is something I think we all need right now with just all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world. Every week, I take about an hour, try to cover some of the top stories that are taking place. And I've really enjoyed that process. I've learned a lot. It's been great to get actual comments from people like you, a ton of engagement. Not everyone's happy with me, but that's okay. That's part of the journey, and I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning. I'm getting different people's perspective, help me understand and learn and understand how other people are perceiving the issues and the stories that I'm talking about, and then even myself. And sometimes it's hard when you're conversing with user 145738510 on TikTok, but there's been some really obviously authentic people watching some of these videos and commenting, and so thank you again. It means a lot. It keeps me excited. It makes me look forward to recording these every week. So we got a lot to go through here. As always, we had the trade war begin. I'm a Canadian, so I'm coming from that perspective. We'll take a look at that. We had the stock market, just volatility, chaos. We're back to pre-election stock market levels, which not everyone is happy about, including anyone who's looking at their portfolio. My Wealthsimple account, I have not been logging in as much. We have some back and forth with Trump and Trudeau. We got Trudeau, some tears. We got Trudeau's apparently last event as Prime Minister. And so I'm going to take a couple moments to look at his best moments and his worst moments. The best moments were a little harder to find, but I think we all know some of the classics on the worst moments. We've got some more interesting polling conflicts. We have a battle, one that I didn't see coming, from Pierre Poilievre and Patrick Bet-David. And if you don't know him, we'll jump into that. We had the Bitcoin reserve. We have the NASDAQ apparently preparing to trade 24 hours. We've got $20,000 OpenAI agents. And then we've got just an interesting loss of critical thinking research from Microsoft. So what happened? I'm not going to relitigate the whole thing, but these tariffs came into effect, 25% on Canadian goods. Now, what's interesting is before this, it was pretty theoretical, and the market and people were really pricing in these were going to continue to get pushed back. They weren't coming into place. And so when they went live, there was definitely a little bit of a shock reaction. The market as a whole not really liking these tariffs. And of course, Canadians and Americans also not really liking these tariffs. One of the biggest ones that stood out most immediately was the auto sector, just how quickly it could destroy the auto sector, and then how intertwined these economies are between Canada, Mexico, and the USA, with parts going back and forth between the border multiple times. And multiple studies came out that said, hey, an American buying a car affected by these tariffs, you're looking at $6,000 to $12,000 increase in the cost of that vehicle, which is not an insignificant amount. And so trade war kicked off. Trudeau's out here giving a speech, retaliatory tariffs. This has been something that there's been a lot of back and forth on. Is this the right strategy to deal with Trump and the tariff situation, the administration, because this is going to increase cost for Canadians. And he went right at Trump. He said, Trump, I know you're a smart man, but this is a dumb thing to do. Talk to Americans. And what's interesting is as he goes out the door, some of his last days here as Prime Minister, I think, we hope, he's had some relatively, at least strong speeches. The drama school has really kicked in for him here. So has some intensity, some gravitas, and then some tears that we'll see later, saying your government has chosen to do this to you. Trudeau, not happy. Our recently re-elected premier here, Doug Ford, also not happy. And so a bunch of exchanges go back and forth. And so goods under USMCA delayed until April 2nd. He said, I can't do April. I don't want to do April Fools. Keeps talking about how much money that one day is going to cost them. But Ford says, I don't care. Even if he's taking these tariffs off or delaying this, I'm still going to go ahead with these tariffs on electricity. And of course, this whole time, House of Commons in Canada, no one's in it. The Parliament is prorogued. So it's a wonderful time for Canada politicians to be absent besides these little speeches and moments that are coming out. So it brings me back to this picture where You have USA kicking Canada off a board while they're standing on that board, and we know what's going to happen when they do that. And just showing that even though Canada is a smaller country, we do have a lot of resources. There's been supply chains that have been built for decades, and it isn't just inconsequential that these tariffs go on Canada and, of course, Mexico, along with the other sides of it, just the inability to have reliance on U.S. in the same way that we did. And some people would say that's a good thing. But I think with what we've seen in the markets, volatility swings, and we'll jump into this in a second, that the unpredictability, the chaos, the temperamental mindset of Trump and the administration to just willy-nilly put on, pull off, is having a significant toll on not just Canadians, but on the U.S. and on the entire world. And there, of course, is, as always with Trump, some misinformation that are part of it. This is just one example about Canadian tariffs on dairy, where it's when Canada imports over a certain amount. And this is Trump who originally negotiated this deal, called it one of the best deals ever negotiated. Again, times change, minds change, you reflect, and maybe you look at the agreement in a different way. But if you can part through all the noise and find some signal, there's some valuable information to understand and know as you try to look and understand what's taking place. And what's interesting, Canadians, I agree, have banded together in a way. I do feel there is a sense of national pride that has benefited the Liberal Party as they stay in power, but we're starting to see that fragment a little bit. But you can see here, Canadian travel bookings to the US are down 40%, with 20% of existing trips being canceled. It's pretty, again, not an insignificant number here. They're going to Vietnam, Mexico, Portugal, and other places. And so if I took a step back, I think one of the debates around this right now is, what is this for? What is this trade war, this tariff situation for? Is it truly because of the fentanyl? There's been mixed messaging there. Is it some switch to tariff-led income for the American country? Is it truly that Trump just doesn't like Trudeau? And we've got some pretty stark examples of that this week, that Trump truly wants Canada as a 51st state for all the resources and everything they have. There's also been talks about defense issues up north with Russia and China. And then here there's a little bit of detailing from the New York Times. You can sift through that information you want and say it's not true, but it's trying to annex the Great Lakes, which is right across where the border is here in Canada, and then huge resources and components of value for both of our countries. We're separated by treaties in 1908 that the U.S. administration says these are relatively easy to abandon. And when I was a kid, I had this idea for this water wars concept that I believe became a real thing. But this is not something that I think that Canadians would accept. These Great Lakes are like deeply valued, and any encroachment on that, I think, would truly kick off a dangerous relationship between the U.S. and Canada beyond even some of the stuff that we're seeing already. And so that brings us to the stock market and the market reaction to all this. On top of it, the EU tariffs, reciprocal tariffs coming. We had the big speech, and we're in a sea red over the last week. Now, there was a huge election run-up after Trump was voted to become president again. So when we pull back and take a view, this is a small dip in years of outperformance and may even be part of a natural pullback or a realistic reaction to a changing worldview from the U.S. administration. Either way, people not very happy with it. And I think the comment from Trump this week didn't make people feel good about this. He said, I'm not even looking at the stock market. And of course, the memes come. So this idea that Trump's focus in this term, his previous one, he did care a lot about how the stock market was performing and used it as an indicator of success, it might not be true in this instance, which a lot of people would argue is a good thing. And that asset appreciation has been so large over the last few years that some more focus on the more average consumer or worker in America is a worthwhile and even the right thing to do. That being said, a lot of us feel like this when we look at our portfolio over the last week. And since the election, Tesla down 50%. There goes Elon's net worth. I think he's still got some money left. Nvidia shed over $1 trillion in assets. We're back to where we were Feels like we're going back in time. Now, there are some interesting theories about why this is happening, or even that this is something that they want. And really it's connected to the amount of debt that the U.S. has to pay. And we all talk about this death spiral that the U.S. is facing in many countries across the world, which is the debt load, especially after the inflationary money printing that took place during COVID as the world economy shut down. They don't want to refinance at this 4% plus rate. How do you get the lower rate? You need to show weakness and growth. Jerome Powell to start cutting rates. Now, I think the concern about this is the inflationary environment that tariffs could create in conflict with this goal to lower rates. But with government employees being cut off, uncertainty, we could see and are already seeing some weakness in the business environment. And we even in the latest jobs report in the US saw some signs of a moderating economy. And of course, the fear and greed index continues to stay elevated. It's been an extreme fear for 9 consecutive trading days. Again, volatility can be good if you're trading. And when you're looking at the long term, yes, we know that this is a temporary hit, and on average, we should continue to recover. But still, a lot of us are feeling a little bit more like pre-Jeff Bezos, so the stock market in 2024 versus the stock market in 2025. I apologize for this next section. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Justin Trudeau. There was some more communication between Trudeau and Trump this week. Again, a little bit of a tumultuous relationship that they have. And what was really interesting is Trump publicly calling out what many Canadians see as Trudeau's strategy as he ends his term, but also continues to try to prop up the next Liberal leader, most likely Mark Carney. And so Donald, not going to do his voice, said the call ended up in a somewhat friendly manner. He said, Justin's unable to tell me when the election is taking place and realizes that he's trying to use this issue to stay in power. And then the quote that I love, good luck, Justin. And he wasn't just done there, continuing to go at Trudeau, believe it or not, despite the terrible job he's done for Canada. I think that Justin Trudeau is using the tariff problem, which he has largely caused, in order to run again for Prime Minister. So much fun to watch. And Trudeau comes back on screen. This time, Trudeau is a little emotional. I don't think that call went that well. And here we are, a little close up to watery eyes. Let's just watch this 25 seconds.
On a personal level, I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future.
Trudeau, gravitas, emotional. He just missed the Oscars season there, so maybe next year we'll get him in. Do I believe Justin cares about Canada? I do, despite what a lot of people think. I think he's just in his distorted worldview that he's in. Do I think he thinks that he's done a good job? I don't know. Personally, I couldn't continue myself and be in the role that he's in, knowing how Canadians felt about me if I was him. Like, I just couldn't do it. I would be making a hard pivot of how I was operating, or at least doing a lot to learn from like where this perspective is coming from. Or I would say I am obviously not the right person for this, which Trudeau has done neither of these things. And for that reason, I feel a little bad. Like, I don't have a problem with someone showing emotion, someone being passionate about the country. But as Trump even said in that comment there, he's really created this hole for himself. He has been the one in power for the last 10 years, leading to this setup that has created so much chaos and also put Canada in a relatively undiversified, defenseless position with our economy to make us so vulnerable to an attack from the U.S. That being said, there is a bright light on the other side. We'll tune into Justin here for a second again, talking about his last public appearance as Prime Minister.
It's a touching moment for me. This will be my last public event as Prime Minister. So it's my last one till Sunday night anyway. It is a big moment for me to be home here in Montreal, able to do this. It's a touching moment for me.
So the new Liberal leader will come March 9th. There's questions around how long this leader will be in place. Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney being the front runners in this. Most people, I think the money is on Carney winning. I have no idea who this person is, but maybe something along those lines. And with that, Trudeau as Prime Minister, we see in the last days, which is a beautiful moment, I think, for many Canadians, and really an end of an era for Canadian politics, one that I don't think is going to be looked on so favorably, where affordability has become a huge challenge, where immigration levels have caused an erosion of the quality of life in a low-trust society, where overly progressive perspectives and views dominated the population, and the degradation of Canadian pride erased a strong national identity and proud country that was once looked upon from the rest of the world as just a beacon of hope and a society that people should strive to be. So with that in mind, I just want to take a minute to look at some of Trudeau's worst and best moments as Prime Minister of Canada. Of course, we had the famous run of blackface. It's not just one. Multiple instances dressed in blackfaces. He just loves costumes, loves covering his skin in color. There's a close-up. This was horrible. We had the Cringe Fest, where Trudeau dressed in Shervanis the whole time, even when everyone else was in suits. There you go again. This guy just loves costume. He's a drama teacher. He loves this stuff. Just wanted to dress up. We had freezing the bank accounts of Freedom Convoy protesters. This brought a lot of eyes onto Canada. And as more information's come out, used disinformation, improperly used emergency powers, and really put a lot of anger and pain and suffering together for the collective working class of Canada who were affected by COVID. We had SNC-Lavalin affair, which I've talked about in previous videos, where Trudeau intervened in a criminal case against the construction company, now known as Atkins-Relias, formerly SNC-Lavalin. We've had the shutting down, the proroguing of Parliament as he's transferring over power and resigning. We've had $20 billion sent to Ukraine, even as most Canadians don't want this to happen. And many, many more. Now, I've said this before, I voted for Justin Trudeau, and I was young, I was naive. I fell for the charm and the communication. And as I sit here, in the outcome of my own decision, been a big lesson, a big regret, and really changed my perspective and understanding of the world, of politicians, of progressives versus conservatives, and I think changed a generation of Canadians who would have likely been progressives and set them back decades. Will I miss Trudeau? No. Mark Carney comes in, apparently he's still going to be around, and I really hope that's not what happens. And I hope he just goes back to his little spot in Tofino or whatever in BC and takes some time on the beach and we can all get a break together. Now, I did want to take a moment just to highlight a few good things, at least from my perspective and the perspective of some Canadians. We have the $10 a day childcare program, which I know has brought a lot of relief to people who are growing their families and have been affected by the affordability. And again, there's criticisms about let the market do its thing, and I'm sure there's been a bunch of wasted spend here. But at a core, I think that's a meaningful contribution. I would love for someone to also just prove me wrong and say this was horrible. I'm just looking at it from at least ideological view still after all the lessons that I should have learned. And then I found this chart, thank you marijuana moment, where maybe there was some bias here, but even with the rollout of marijuana, and a lot of people didn't like it, that was a huge step in the progressive world of drug legalization and decriminalization. Some approve how he handled COVID. Most people would say we were shut down for way too long, and the messaging and the rhetoric around having to take these vaccines and forcing people to do them was not positive. So I'm surprised to see this. I'm trying to be positive here. Expanding the social safety net, the child benefit that I talked about, dental care was a big one. I think some people do support the support of Ukraine when generally people don't want to see a country be invaded. And so his support of that, maybe it was too much money or maybe not everything was perfect, but some positivity around that. A ban on assault style firearms. Some people would say they don't agree with that, but most people don't want to see mass murdering with assault style rifles in their country, and that's something that we have a much lower percentage taking place than if we look to our neighbors to the south. As much as some of this woke progressivism has been detrimental, and even he has contradicted that with some of his own picks versus what he says, I do think that we've continued to make strides in equality, and I don't think I can attribute to him directly, but he at least tried. It gets lower and lower from here. Carbon tax, TMX pipeline, inflation, and immigration policy. Okay, these things aren't positive, but I did my best. I highlighted a few. And at least at the start, when he was friends with Obama and before all these scandals and chaos, I do think he, at least on the surface, had an air that people felt represented Canada until it didn't. So thank you, Justin Trudeau, for leaving way too late and having created a huge problem that will take decades to fix. Thank you for at least leaving. And so where does that bring us? We know most likely Carney's going to come into power. After that, we don't exactly know when an election is going to happen. Some people believe immediately. Some people say end of March. Some people say April, or it's going to be late October 2025, or maybe some emergency continues to happen that pushes it into 2026, and some people think it's just never going to happen, which I don't really believe it will happen. We continue to see huge discrepancies in polling here in Canada, where apparently some of the people who are doing the polling are just extremely biased and say that publicly. So I do think we have to take all these with a grain of salt. And with that, apparently the biased one showing Liberal women breaking dramatically towards the Liberals, and Liberals winning 41-36. Whereas on the other side, we're seeing Leisure sample size 1,500 online, maybe not that much data reliance here, but Conservatives regain their lead on Liberals, and the Mark Carney honeymoon phase is over as more and more debacles happen in his storytelling, his lies, his narrative, and his background becomes uncovered. And I can't find the exact one, but the Conservatives have a little bit of a war chest in terms of money, and I'm now starting to see ads everywhere, and it's in red, and they make them look like the devil, compare them to Trudeau. And so a really effective ad strategy that's running on CBC, running everywhere. I see it in the gym when I'm working out, and seeming to have some impact on people's perspective and understanding of who Carney is. That being said, people have been questioning a little bit of the quietness of Pierre. I think that's a word. I don't think it is. And one things that I didn't have in my bingo cards was PBD, relatively conservative podcaster. A lot of people like him, a lot of people don't. If you look into his history and then just his persona, and was not very happy that Pierre would not come on to his podcast. I'd be really interested to hear, was this the right decision from Pierre? Again, this is an American podcast. They recently had Andrew Tate and continue to platform people that others feel are detrimental to society. Now, again, Pierre is in the middle of a USA versus Canada battle, so maybe going down and doing US podcasts is not the most ideal thing for him. It's a very biased audience in a way if you watch PBD, which I watched and then turned off, where you know the talking point, you know the viewpoint, and so it becomes a bit stale and predictable. You've got the association with some of the people that then PBD has interviewed, which Pierre might not like, and it could be some high-risk situation with even PBD and some of his team's feelings towards Canada right now. So I'd be interested. What do you think? Should Pierre have gone on this podcast? I would say I agree that I would like to see him in pieces of content. He did the Jordan Peterson episode, and that was great and got a lot of attention on him. And I know there's not that many Canadians with that high of a profile doing these public podcasts, but I think the more I've been exposed to him through those long form conversations, the less MAGA maple branding liberals can hit him with, because he has reasonable viewpoints and can construct those through conversation in a way that is articulate, not harsh, empathetic even, and again, pointing to this common sense ideology that he is trying to bring to Canada. And so I'm interested just if Canadians would like to see Pierre on that global stage, on podcasts like PBD, on Rogan, interacting with these huge audiences and bringing Canada on even a more global stage than I think it already is with all these tariff battles that are happening. Okay, so that does it, Canadian politics. I just want to hit one more political story that was interesting this week, and then I'll jump into some tech to close this out. We had David Sachs, who I've followed a long time, in the All In podcast. Here's a video of him. There he is on the right beside Trump. They had this summit roundtable, which I tuned in for just a second. It just seemed a lot of gratefulness and sucking up to Trump. But great to see Sachs after all this as the AI and crypto czar bring this together. And so what happened this week? Trump signed an executive order to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think this was a bit of a conflicting moment for people who obviously are invested in crypto and Bitcoin, because a lot of them were hoping that the U.S. was going to start buying Bitcoin. But what this executive order at least most clearly stated is that there's been a lot of Bitcoin seized in criminal or civil asset forfeiture proceedings, which had huge value to them and were not fully utilized to their potential. Now, what was interesting is there were people who, when the idea of a Bitcoin reserve originally came out, said, why would American taxpayers pay for the purchase of Bitcoin or other crypto? And so there's this really fascinating dichotomy between people who want to pump up crypto and Bitcoin and all of this, but at the same time, a lot of those people who are small government capitalists, yet because those two things are mixing together, they're trying to rationalize and force them, because obviously if US starts buying these, the value of them is going to go up. There's going to be more and more credibility. So this was a really interesting moment. And immediately after the order was signed, you can see a huge drop. Wow, I had to scroll down the screen to get there. It was not the reserve that crypto bulls had in mind, but at least personally, from my view, was the right way to approach this. I wouldn't want Canadian tax dollars to buy a relatively speculative asset. And yes, Bitcoin has been the leader in them, but when XRP and all these other ones that aren't even necessarily decentralized are mentioned, there was a lot of skepticism about what's going on. And even people associated with Republican Party and administration were up in arms on the prospect that was taking place. So Trump, promises made, promises kept. Trump ended with this hilarious quote about Bitcoin.
Government has foolishly sold tens of thousands of additional Bitcoin that were worth billions and billions of dollars had they not sold them, but they did sell them, mostly during the Biden administration. Not a good thing to have done. From this day on, America will follow the rule that every Bitcoin knows very well: never sell your Bitcoin. That's a little phrase that they have. I don't know if that's right or not. Who the hell knows?
I think they had a picture of Michael Saylor there, all stressed out about this big moment for crypto. And I think a good outcome, at least from my perspective, and people who are still trying to figure out this entire digital infrastructure that could have huge ramifications for the global currency and even U.S. as a hegemony with the U.S. dollar. Let's go rapid fire. Interesting moment as the NASDAQ exchange shares it's planning to offer 24-hour trading on its stock exchange, aiming to compete with that crypto economy that can trade at any time. So lots of questions about how this is going to work. When does the day end and when does it start? How will this affect volatility? When will trading most take place? And really change the dynamic of investing when you're looking at the NASDAQ and an index that has generally been traded in such a short period of time every day. And we got a little poll here. I personally, I'm going to say it's a positive, but no, it's a net negative as the leader in this. And as I take a look at these comments and try to think about it myself, there's a lot of pushback on algorithmic traders really having an advantage, that people will be pinned to the market at all times. And maybe this sentiment, absolutely, why only lose money during 6:30 a.m. to 1 p.m.? And okay, to end on some tech, as I always try to do, one major story that came out, now originally published by The Information. OpenAI could charge up to $20,000 per month for specialized AI agents. And they've got several agent products tailored for different applications. Now, I've already seen a little demo to a small audience for a sales agent, which is really interesting. And at $20,000 a month, it'll be aimed at supporting PhD level research. Now, a lot of feedback and commentary on this. We've seen, I think, the excitement over this deep research system and just the complexity of tasks and analysis and runtime that it can do to create something highly compelling for you. And there's a cost associated with that, which is apparently part of this story here. Obviously, OpenAI lost a lot of money. It seems Microsoft may be pulling back some support, still up in the air. But searching for profitability at OpenAI, and apparently even this $200 a month release was botched because it continues to be unprofitable, with many people pushing those deep research tasks to an edge and costing OpenAI a lot of compute power. Sam himself trying to attack this problem. This has been a problem at Speak, the company that I've been working on and building for a long time, because we were a bootstrap company. We couldn't afford to run these deficits. And so we built a transactional system that's much more based on usage than just a flat subscription, because if people used our system to the fullest extent, we would be wildly unprofitable and we would be broke and done as a company right now. Now, OpenAI, a little bit different situation because of their ability to raise capital, Sam's connections, and then obviously now the hype and excitement around the platform, the market fit that they've got, and a huge consumer demand for their products. You can see he is now trying to figure this out as people push those plans to an edge, and I'm sure many people become unprofitable customers. Myself, maybe, with the amount that I use ChatGPT and push it, and I have no regard for their cost profile and structure, so I might be one of the target audiences that he's looking at. Now, this is a challenge because what I've seen at Speak AI, and I think what people want, is they want to pay a flat price, unlimited usage, and not have to worry about credits, monitoring usage when they've hit limits, all these things that have been challenges that we've faced as a small company. And you can see the overall feedback there is this is too complex. It puts a cognitive weight on the user. It decreases the enjoyment of the system. It's friction in the adoption curve. It's still so early. And even Dharmesh, the founders of HubSpot, basically meaning that you have to force these decisions on users if this search, if this chat interaction is worth it. And with the rise of models like DeepSeek and then Alibaba's new model, more open source, they could churn a lot of users and customers by creating this situation. So we've got this going on. On top of this, we have $20,000 agents. And if this goes live and this can be successful, that means we have crossed a huge threshold, because $200 a month, yes, maybe you're replacing a contractor, you get to do 1 or 2 tasks for you a month. $20,000, depending on the experience, the skill set, you can hire 1, 2, 3, 4 people who are all good at what they do for that budget. And the question now becomes, is that $20,000 through an agent structure that OpenAI is doing better than that human alternative? And so if this launches and this goes and people adopt this and they get the value out of it, there's a huge moment in time here that's changed how we view AI, how valuable we consider it. There's a huge level of differentiation and execution required here in OpenAI to hit that value proposition, especially as more competitors emerge and more optimizations to these models take place. And when we start to see stories about companies buying these agents, I think we're very quickly going to say, is it worth it? Is it not? Already with the $200 a month, we've seen a bunch of people upgrade to that and say, this is amazing. This is worth it. So we're on this upward trajectory of costs, when originally one of the promise was that it was going to continue to come lower. But obviously the amount of energy, the compute, the technical talent, all of this creates this overhead cost that is leading companies to have to be able to be sustainable and survive on their own. And so fascinating stuff that I'm excited to follow. One more, which I think is quite related. Microsoft has published research showing an erosion of critical thinking skills among workers using generative AI tools such as ChatGPT. Pretty rich from a company who's obviously funded this, now putting $80 billion more into this market. 119 knowledge workers examined how they integrate AI into their workflow, and the trend emerged. The more participants relied on AI, the less they exercised their own critical thinking skills. Writing, analysis, and evaluation, a decline in confidence in their abilities, and just deferring to AI. Now, this is something I felt myself. I'll bullet point something and then expand it, and I'll rewrite it to match my voice again. And I know people have done a really good job getting the prompts and instructions to match their voice. I'm still doing it probably manually and maybe not as refined. Some really interesting points that came out of it. Time constraints exacerbated this issue. You have a certain quota as sales. Why write every email? Personally, when you can have AI do it and achieve 80% quality, maybe even more in some instances, we know that it has more access to information, more cognitive abilities in a lot of ways. And with deep research from OpenAI and Google, this has become more accessible. The question around outsourcing is not new. Calculators were once thought to weaken math skills, but it's obvious when I've seen this anecdotally that some of our moments where we would use our own brain are rapidly being outsourced to AI. Why would Microsoft publish this? They want to understand how people are using AI. Now, this is the interesting part. If AI makes employees worse at their job, businesses might stop buying it. Or I think the alternative is that businesses replace workers. So another super fascinating update on this journey that we're all in. Everything feels hyper accelerated right now. Just such a crazy, fun, interesting, wild, chaotic time. I'm having fun. I'm also not having fun, but I'm having fun and appreciate you being here with me along in the journey. What do you think? Any thoughts on today's episode? Anything else that you think is worthwhile? What did I miss? What's your feedback? Do you love me? Do you hate me? Should I stand? Should I sit? How can I do this better? And what do you think is coming next that we should be talking about or will be talking about? Thanks as always for checking this out. This has been Tyler Bryden. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.